Hello and welcome to Agents of Nonprofit. My name is Alexander Lapa, and I'm here to speak with everyday superheroes helping nonprofits. Joining me today is Lori Zoss Kraska to talk about corporate sponsorships. Lori, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
So, the first question I love to ask people is what is your superhero origin story? That is to say, how did you get started working with nonprofits?
Wow. So I was so fortunate to work with PBS and NPR stations for about 10 years. And for those that aren't familiar, with those letters, PBS is public broadcasting television here in the States, and NPR is National Public Radio in the States. So a lot of people don't realize that on the stations level, they actually utilize resources together. And it was my job to work with a group of folks who went out and found corporate sponsorship dollars for our member stations and other stations. And I led that team. I loved it. I felt like I had a really good knack for it. I felt like I knew how to bridge what corporations were looking for into what could be offered and what was needed in public broadcasting. And we were very successful. And like I said, I did that for about 10 years. And I always had this entrepreneurial bug about me, though, always. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if we could somehow translate the same type of success with other types of nonprofits and purpose-driven organizations? So in 2018, that's when I made the jump into working with all different types of nonprofits and purpose-driven organizations to help them find corporate sponsorship and corporate resources.
So, just to set the level field, because I'm sure most of my listeners will know what corporate sponsorships is.
Yeah.
I'm just to set the level field, how would you define the major differences between a corporate sponsorship and, let's say, a major gift donating or a general fundraising campaign? Like, what is it particular about corporate sponsorships besides the fact that there is a corporate entity involved that makes it distinguished from any other types of fundraising?
Yeah, and it gets a little complicated because every nonprofit could treat it differently. But I'm going to give you a general sense. Usually major giving happens with individuals or happens with traditional foundations. So a traditional foundation be someone like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, right? Where corporate sponsorship tends to come from a couple of different areas. So it could come from corporate foundations. So like a Walmart, a Target, or an IBM has their own corporate philanthropy, their own corporate foundation, where money has been designated for specific vision, views, values to contribute to. Or through corporate social responsibility, also known as CSR. Those are parts of the company that have budgets to do community engagement work, as well as fund various sponsorship projects. And then also corporate marketing sometimes is a place that we find corporate sponsorship dollars. And corporate sponsorship can mean a lot of different things. It could be sponsoring an event. It could be sponsoring a mentorship program within your organization. It could be thought leadership opportunities where you're bringing in a corporate sponsor as a keynote speaker. It could be something specifically related to corporate giving, like providing dollars for a food bank initiative around the holidays. So it really, really kind of is a large category, but I find that nonprofits can treat it differently. So hopefully that's a good enough definition and description to help your listeners.
I imagine typically a nonprofit would have someone dedicated toward corporate giving. It is not completely separate, but is focused on that particular element because there are so many moving parts. I mean, there's 3 types, you said, in different kinds of events. So that must be at least a full-time job in itself.
Well, you would think. So what I find is that a lot of nonprofits, they kind of put corporate giving onto some other types of professionals. So to your point, they might add corporate giving to the major gifts officer. I've even seen corporate giving and added to a plan giving officer, which, I don't see a lot of synchronicity there, but because resources are so tight in all levels of nonprofits, sometimes corporate giving is the one thing that is they try to add on to other people's plates. But I will say, to your point, the ones who do it well or the ones that have really created a commitment towards it do have somebody specifically calling on corporations. That is correct.
Okay. And then would you consider it good advice to recommend pretty much any nonprofit to seek out corporate sponsorship? Or is there certain criteria, maybe a certain size or a segment or industry or element of the nonprofit where it makes more sense to do so in this case, but less so in that case?
I think a great yardstick to figure that out is just to try something in a very small, scalable way. So if you are a nonprofit that doesn't right now have a corporate sponsorship strategy, or somebody that's actually calling actively on corporations for sponsorship or philanthropy, you might want to test it. So a great way to test is, I like to say 5, not 50. So research maybe 5 companies you have an interest in potentially learning more about for potential sponsorship opportunity. Go to their website, look at their annual report, look at their reports to the community, see if you can see a giving history or a sponsorship history. And is there a match between what they've done in the past or what they say their pillars of giving or pillars of sponsorship are to what you do? And research the decision maker, reach out, but don't create a list of 50 of these. Just start with 5 over a 5-week period and see what you're able to bring about. I think that's a great way to start to see, is this something that is of interest in somebody within your organization taking on more actively? And what is the response like from the community? So that's a great way to test to see if a corporate sponsorship strategy definitely is for you. But I would say, being that this is the work I'm in, I see the power of what a corporate sponsorship can do and the benefits of having corporate partners and sponsors in your ecosystem. And I do recommend it for all sizes of nonprofits.
So if I would interpret what you said, it's a matter of doing the research, finding out 5 organizations, I like that 5, not 50.
Yeah.
5 organizations that you align with or you have some kind of commonality between, right? So you don't want to maybe reach out to someone or an organization that has completely different values or different principles, but something you can connect with. Is there any kind of criteria to that? Or is it just a matter of, we believe in the environment, for example, in less carbon footprints, for example, and these are the 5 organizations we found that are aligned with that, and therefore there's enough of a commonality to reach out and saying, hey, can we work something? Can we have a relationship?
That's a great question. So I try to get as specific as possible. And what I find with corporations now, they're being specific. So maybe, even 10 years ago, where a corporation might say, we're very interested in supporting educational efforts. That's a pretty big category, right? What they're saying now is, we're interested in supporting K through 12 after school programs to promote literacy. So you see the difference. So the more specific that you can be in your outreach to connect and reference, yes, we are an organization that does offer programs in the K through 12 area for literacy. If you're able to match that right away using the lingo that's on their website that they're utilizing to what they want to connect with, you're going to be more successful than just going in and saying, well, we do offer educational opportunities. You have to be as specific as possible. But like I said, I think things are a bit easier now because corporate foundations and corporations themselves are being more specific on their websites as to what they have an interest in supporting specifically.
Yeah, I totally agree with the niching down and being very, very specific. That applies to a whole bunch of industries because the messaging just becomes a lot clearer. When you find ones that perfectly align or almost perfectly align with what you're trying to achieve, you will attract more, you'll catch more fish, I guess is an expression that I use sometimes. But the idea is that you're now much more in sync than saying, we just do stuff or we help people or we help the community versus K through 12, maybe special ed, something very, very specific. I think you're right. It'll resonate more and easier to find companies that are aligned with that.
Absolutely. Yes.
And then let's walk through kind of the high level process then. So once you've found these 5 organizations, what typically is the next step? Is it you need to find someone specific within there? Is there sometimes in a department within the corporation that you can reach out to? Is it the CEO? Like where would be the next step for a nonprofit to go to or to do to start building that relationship?
Yeah, so you definitely want to find that a decision maker, a really good contact. I really like to target someone that's at least a senior director or higher. I mean, even VP or higher is better, but a senior director is also a good start. You are looking in the areas of companies to find titles like Senior Director of Corporate Social Responsibility, VP of CSR, Corporate Social Responsibility, Executive Director of the Corporate Foundation. A lot of times the same person oversees the company's CSR efforts and oversees their foundation. I've noticed that a lot, which is great. You're dealing with one person that has access to two different pockets of money, which is really good. If you are dealing with marketing, and usually you deal more with marketing when you're talking about event sponsorship, then you're looking for a chief marketing officer, senior vice president of marketing. So you can search those terms with the name of the company on Google and see if you can find some names. Another place I like to search titles is on LinkedIn. A lot of people don't think about using LinkedIn as kind of your own little personal search engine for companies and contacts, but it really can work that way for you. So if you just typed in, searching for Senior Director of Marketing, Walmart, you can get a list of people that fit that description on LinkedIn, and then you can find the right person via the LinkedIn profile that you're looking for. So then from there, I get a lot of questions. Well, how do you find their email? So if their email is not readily available, I recommend using a tool like Rocket Reach, or there's other tools out there that are services that provide emails for you. Now, granted, they are paid services, but if this is a strategy, corporate engagement that you are really going to commit to for long term, I highly recommend them. Otherwise, other ways to get emails is if you tap into your local library's system, and most people can through their computers. If you're a member of the library system, they have databases like LexisNexis, Dun & Bradstreet that also have contact information as well that you can get for free. So that next step after finding the right person and the contact info would be sending out that first email.
So it sounds like email was the next step. So if I were to reverse that, reaching out by phone, sending a snail mail, these are not typically approaches you would start with. Email seems to be the right or the best approach.
It's usually how I start, but I also am a big proponent of a hybrid approach where you're mixing email with LinkedIn engagement. I've had a lot of success, actually, especially over the past 6 months, as well as the clients that I work with, reaching out to people on LinkedIn. It's probably a bit less crowded in terms of reaching out to you, which is helpful. And, if you happen to have issues where maybe your email might not be going through because it's an email a company's email server doesn't recognize and it hasn't been approved by someone, which is very possible, especially with larger organizations, LinkedIn is definitely a way to go. Send an in-mail message or a connection message, something very brief. And that's a great way to get a hold of decision makers as well.
And then I imagine the first question shouldn't be, "Hey, do you have 5 million for me?" kind of thing, right? There has to
No.
be some kind of relationship building.
Yes, absolutely. Great question. So when I'm formatting an email, I tell people to try to keep power of brevity. I think the biggest issue that I see the most with nonprofits and other purpose-driven organizations when they send out their first communication, they say way too much. And I think that's because in their mind, they think this is my one time to make a first impression and I have to get it out there. That's incorrect thinking. You have to see this as kind of part one in a journey. The purpose of that first email or LinkedIn message is just to generate interest for them to want to learn more about you. So in that first message, you just want to keep it to under 200 words. 150 is my sweet spot, but I tell people under 200 words. Who are you and who is your organization first? Second, how does your nonprofit organization connect to the corporation? That's where that research comes in. So if I use that example I referenced before, my nonprofit XYZ has programs in offering assistance to K through 12 students looking for after school solutions. I see that XYZ Corporation also has supported this type of work in the past. Would love to see if there's interest in an introductory conversation to discuss our mutual potential partnership, something like that. And then I end with a statement of gratitude. Thank you very much for taking the time to review and looking forward to your response. Really, that's it. That's it. And I have had success with that messaging as well as similar messaging on LinkedIn.
As you were saying the words, actually, it reminds me of how I approach client testimonials. So when I'm doing certain projects in Salesforce, rather than just saying, hey, can you fill out this client testimonial and here are all the questions? I like to start with, would it be okay if I sent you questions for a client testimonial? And I add to that asking for the no, which means letting them off the hook. I mean, maybe it doesn't apply in this context, but I just finish the story to say, it's okay to say no. I don't want to be offended or hurt by it. And I use those words to give them an out so that they don't feel the pressure of having to respond. I don't know if that would translate to this corporate messaging. What would be your thoughts on that? Or keep it positive, keep it light, and end with gratitude. Is that really maybe the better approach?
Actually, I do implement something like what you've described, but in a different way. So when I'm asking for an introductory conversation, I put in there, would love to talk to you or a member of your team. So that gives them an out from having to speak with me personally. But if they are asking a member of their team to kind of vet me out, I'm fine with that. So you could say that is kind of approach that follows your philosophy.
Okay, it's a similar. It's not putting them in a position where they have to feel obligated themselves to respond to, that they can delegate.
Right.
That makes sense.
Yes.
Okay. And then I also got the impression as you were talking that you said part one of a journey. So there's obviously going to be a journey involved. This is the introduction.
Yeah.
Is and I don't know if you have any kind of numbers or ideas, or just to know what getting yourself into. Is it? I imagine it's more a matter of weeks and months in terms of building that relationship, building that connection, so that at some point in that future, you can ask for that for the big money.
Yeah. So here's what tends to happen. And again, every scenario is different. But if I kind of average all the work I've done, we have that first outreach. And then if somebody does respond, we usually can book some sort of Zoom meeting or in-person meeting, depending on geography, within the next 2 to 3 weeks. And that meeting is really the get to know you. It's almost the first date per se. If it's, it's our first date, we're getting to know each other. Based on how well that meeting goes, at the end of that meeting, usually we're going to get some instruction from the corporation as to, okay, here's what I would like from you next. A proposal, a presentation, but never on that meeting are you taking, like a pre-created proposal yet. You never take the proposal on that first meeting. You need to ask questions about what their interests are, what makes them tick, what are the things that in the back of your mind that your organization can offer in this sponsorship that you actually are just finding out about in this meeting. If you take a pre-written proposal to that meeting, you're making a lot of assumptions that might not be good. You also might be leaving money on the table. So let it happen naturally. It's usually in the second meeting where you're back for a proposal review or a presentation that you're really starting to talk about kind of the ask. And then usually after that, there's a waiting process. And honestly, Alex, that waiting could be weeks to months. It just varies on the organization. And then you will get your answer. So that's a very, very summarized version of what the process is like.
Rather than just sit back and wait and then, cross your fingers that one day they will respond.
Yes.
Would you normally recommend certain, biweekly touch points like, hey, thinking of you, or any updates, or is it merely a matter of sitting back in your chair and waiting for them to respond? Because I know that in certain negotiation strategies, when you make a proposal, it's the first person to speak that loses. I think there's something to that effect. But I mean, there's something to be said about, asking a question, then waiting for that response. Now, this happens in the context I'm bringing it up, it's more of a conversation face to face. I guess the question I'm trying to formulate here is when you've made the ask and you're now waiting for the response, would you suggest certain touch points before you do get that response, or really just waiting, and it could be, you said months, before a response comes back?
Follow up is essential. So, what my suggestion is at the end of that meeting where you've given the ask, first of all, ask for the expectation. Okay, what are the next steps in terms of getting feedback on our proposal today or feedback on this meeting? And they'll usually tell you, well, I've got to take this to whomever, or if you're dealing directly with the decision maker, I'm assessing other types of proposals and we're looking to have a decision in 3 weeks. So if they gave you the expectation of 3 weeks, I would follow up basically the day after that third week date would kind of fall, and just reference when we last met, you mentioned 3 weeks, wanted to check in on the progress of that. And I would say a good 80% of the time, they're going to respond to you and let you know where things are. If you're in a situation where you've kind of asked about follow up, you're following the process, but you're not getting responses, what I try to do is find some other touch points to send them that have nothing to do with the proposal. So for instance, maybe I find an article that's related to their industry that I just send out of, hey, just an FYI, I came across this article regarding X, thought you might have an interest in it. Or if this funder is somebody that's out of town and you happen to know that you're going to be there, you could reference, oh, hey, just want to let you know I'm going to be in DC in 2 weeks. I'd be glad to stop by if you have a few moments, or we can meet for coffee. That's another way to go. Another touch point is learning about, and you can a lot of times find this in their LinkedIn profiles, what are some of the things that get them excited about their work? So maybe you find a decision maker that's really into leadership development opportunities or going to different types of seminars, webinars, what have you. You could find a webinar that you just happen to found, and you can forward that on to the decision maker and say, hey, by the way, just want to let you know I saw this come through my email, just thought I would share this with you. So those are just a couple ways to help you stay top of mind in the process without you continuously sending emails, what's happening. But follow up is definitely important. Yes.
I love it. Those are very specific and very good suggestions. And we kind of skipped over the dollar amount, but I'm curious to know how, for the corporate sponsorship world, how do you know how much to ask for or how much you could ask for? In the sense of, is that generally a conversation you have together where it kind of naturally forms to a particular number or range of numbers? Or is it more like a gut feeling you have as you have these conversations to say, I believe they could provide this much, or giving them options, like saying, here are 3 different opportunities that we have where we would love your corporate sponsorship. We would really appreciate if you could pick one, or, if you're lucky, more than one.
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a few different scenarios here. Sometimes in that first introductory meeting, if it's going well, I will engage and ask, okay, in preparation for our next meeting, I'm obviously going to have a proposal ready for you, a presentation. I want to make sure I'm meeting expectations in terms of what is available on your end for sponsorship. So do you have a range that I could possibly work with? So when I come back, I'm presenting something that, is resonating with you. So again, I use that technique if the meeting is going well, that first meeting. So I've got a number going in on the second meeting with that proposal. If I don't have that information, or sometimes decision makers will say to kind of keep their cards close, well, it just really varies. If this is something that really resonates with us, who knows what it could be? I've actually been in those situations too. So then in that respect, when I go back for that second meeting with a proposal, I go in with some tiered options or some ranges. So, and another way you can look at ranges comfortably is look at their giving history. So you can usually, at least with a lot of public companies you're dealing with, you can find how much they are spending on sponsorships. So you have a sense. And even some of the private organizations, that don't have financial data publicly, they do publicize what they are doing with nonprofits because it's, they know that people like working with companies that do good, right? So a lot of times you will find what their sponsorship commitments has been. So looking at their history and utilizing that is kind of a guide stick for you can also be helpful.
There's a lot of parallels between major gift giving and corporate sponsorship, from what I'm hearing, at least in part of this conversation. But I think that one big difference is the fact that these corporate sponsors are already in the nature of wanting to help. Like there's already a desire
Yeah.
to sponsor something, and it's now about finding the right something to sponsor versus, at least from what I had conversations with major gift donors, they might be open to the idea, but they're less receptive. I think they have to be warmed up a little more to the idea of giving before they actually give. But otherwise, the process and the ask and the waiting and the touch points, that they do sound familiar. So to go back to your earlier point, I see why it would make sense, depending on your size of your organization, of your nonprofit organization, to double up the major gift officer with the corporate sponsor officer.
Absolutely. Yes, that's an excellent point.
Going to a bit more philosophical then, like there is, I hope there is, maybe there is, I would like to think there is more and more organizations that are trying to be more philanthropic and give back to the community. And there seems to be a trend, I believe there's a trend in this direction. There's always a balance between, especially in the corporate world, making money for your shareholders, stock value, dividends, all that kind of good stuff, and giving back to the community. And I'm curious to know your perception of where the landscape is in that. Do you see a trend moving in that direction, or is it the pickings are still very slim and hopefully it'll be better one day because now it's still about the dollar and keeping it in house?
No, I think there's the need and the interest from corporations to want to sponsor and be a good corporate citizen through philanthropy continues to grow. And I think that this is a great question because a lot of times you'll hear in the media, well, XYZ is reporting really low earnings, and then nonprofits will assume that they might not be a good candidate for sponsorship when that's not true. As a matter of fact, there was a major large retailer here in the US yesterday that on the same day is reporting sales that are down. But on the foundation side, they have made an amazing commitment over the next 7-year period at over $250 million. So,
Wow.
so again, you have to understand that these are two different areas of the organization. And just because something might not be going right in one area of the organization doesn't mean they're going to abandon ship on the other side of it with philanthropy and corporate social responsibility. If anything, they have to do more, right? They have to really get out there more to keep relevant and to show their interest in being a good corporate citizen. So I think it is essential for all levels of organizations to keep engaging with corporations. I think the hard part for organizations right now is it's just becoming more competitive. There's more nonprofits that are engaging corporations. So the competition for money is at its peak. But that doesn't mean that the money isn't there. It just means you have to do a really good job at setting yourself apart. And a great way to do that takes us to the beginning of our conversation, really honing in on your research and being as specific as possible with your connection to that organization.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is the distinguishing factor. And I mean, generally, they talk about how the number of donors, talking about individual donors, are down. Major gift donors are, from what I understand, is more or less stable. Sometimes it's going up. So, where does corporate sponsorships fit in that too? Are the numbers generally going up, meaning more corporations want to be more philanthropic? Is it stable? Is it going down? Like, what is the general trend of where corporate organizations are going towards?
So it's an interesting question because different organizations that track this say different things. Right now, and then I'll tell you my experience. So
Sure.
right now, the narrative in the research is corporate giving is either flat or it's predicted to take a slight decrease. I disagree. based on, and I'm disagreeing based on my experience and my experience with my clients. I think it's really more of the argument of what I said earlier. You just need to do a stronger job of proving your relevancy and why you are a good fit for that corporation. And I also think that turnover of sponsors is quicker than maybe in other areas of giving. So, what I mean by that is with major gifts, nonprofits might be more successful in sustaining major donors versus keeping corporate sponsors. And I think one of the reasons for that is that they don't have a strong enough strategy to stay in touch with their sponsors and to keep themselves relevant.
Let's imagine a scenario where a nonprofit has limited resources, because I think is a general consensus these days, or at least a majority of nonprofits have that kind of issue.
Yeah.
Limited time, limited ability, limited people. Would you like to see corporate sponsorships be a piece of like a third? One third would be corporate sponsorships, one third would be major gift donating, one third regular individual gift donating. If you were to divide the attention of an organization, not at a personal level, but more at an organization level, would you like to see corporate sponsorships as a third of that pie or a bigger or smaller piece than that third? Like, where would you advise nonprofits to spend their attention? Because obviously we're talking about much larger numbers.
Yeah.
The payoff, but it's a longer term strategy. So, where would you normally see corporate giving in the portfolio, maybe, or the attention and resource portfolio of a nonprofit?
Yeah, so this all depends on what is the mission of your nonprofit, because there are going to be areas that corporations are more interested in, and they're setting aside more dollars versus other types of nonprofits. So it's more of a question for you being the nonprofit. Where do you want to spend most of your resources? I would say, just in my own personal experience, if you are a grassroots nonprofit, bringing in probably under $25,000 a year, you want to start with traditional major donors. That's kind of a great way to start. But once you've got, a good base and maybe, you're starting to get a little further ahead, even an additional $20,000, you then, consider a corporate sponsorship program, starting to talk to corporate sponsors. And again, you don't have to have somebody that's 100% doing it all the time. As we talked about earlier, you can start just with a little experimentation. But I think the health of corporate sponsorship in terms of where it is in the piece of the pie of an overall nonprofit really varies based on who the nonprofit is. That's a rough question to answer. I will say, based on my experience again, Alex, that in terms of the percentage of what corporate sponsorship brings in, I've seen anywhere between, 25, 35, 40% of the overall revenue coming in, or donations, sponsorship money coming in, whatever you want to call it. So that's a pretty wide range.
Okay. That gives me a good ballpark, though. I can visualize that.
Mm-hmm.
And then, because I love talking about tools and technology, I was wondering if you had, it doesn't need to be very specific names of the tools, but more like categories of tools, things that nonprofits can use and leverage in this whole corporate sponsorship element. And specifically, if you could make any shout outs to AI and how AI can be used to help.
Sure. So I will say that I experiment with AI, and I've experimented with AI in utilizing, in seeing what type of outreach messages it would create versus on what I create. And I know AI is changing every day. So it's getting more and more advanced. But as of now, the messages that AI creates, I think they're like a B, where I think my messages are an A. So, but again, that could change. I also have utilized a hybrid where I might take a mix of what AI has created in terms of a message for an email, and then added my own flair to it. So it's something that I'm testing. So that's a great way to utilize AI. In terms of other types of digital tools that are out there, Again, utilizing a tool that might be able to help you find some email addresses are great. Also, CRMs, I think, are really good. There's a lot of great startup CRMs that are very easy to use. So you could keep track of all the work that you are doing in corporate engagement. I think that's really good. And, there's even some great technologies out there to help you create proposals, create graphics for your proposals. So those are all things that I definitely like to utilize.
Yeah, AI is still obviously very new. We're learning about it every day, like you said. And I want to underline too, it's great for a first draft of certain emails or proposals or
Yeah.
even ideas. Just, as
Yes.
a corporate sponsor, donor, manager, what should I consider when I'm
Right.
asking for the ask? And it's a great starting point, but it should never
Yeah.
be copy paste.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes. Correct.
And then looking forward into the future, technology aside, just more trends, ideas, where do you see things moving in terms of corporate sponsorships? Because I would like to, and it goes back to the previous kind of question, believe that more and more corporations want to be community responsible. Is that a trend? Am I being too optimistic, or is that really a trend that going in that direction? Like, is that small sliver of pie? Is there a chance of it getting bigger so that more nonprofits can benefit from it? What general trend, or maybe the other direction? What basic trends are you seeing, or would like to see?
There's definitely no, it is more positive. This is a glass half full conversation.
Okay, good.
We are trending positive. There are more organizations getting involved. And I'll tell you that a great litmus test for that are the number of startup organizations that I actually talk to about potential sponsorship is really interesting. And because if you think of sponsorship, it doesn't always have to be about money. It could be about resources. It could be about thought leadership. It could be about trade. So there are a lot of organizations I'm speaking with that are in the startup phase that are interested in sponsorship, and that definitely gives me hope. But also from the larger Fortune 1000s I talk to, or their corporate social responsibility departments are growing. The areas like accessibility, DEI, inclusion, those areas are growing, and interest in funding and sponsoring programs under those areas are definitely growing. And I think corporations overall understand the need to wanting to be a good citizen, not just because it's good for business, but just because it's good when you have such a large impact as a corporation that you could give back to community. I think in general, most organizations understand that and want to continue to grow that area.
Awesome. That makes me happy. Laurie, thank you so much. I'm sure people will have follow-up questions because we only scratched the surface of the possibility. So where can people reach out to you to get in touch and ask more questions?
Sure. My website is thegrowthowl.com, or search my name on LinkedIn, Lori Zoss Kraska, and drop me a message.
Awesome. Laurie, thank you so much for joining me today.
Great being here. Thank you.
All right, that's it for today. I'm Alexander Lapa, and I hope you join me again in the next Agents of Nonprofit.